Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 310. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Sunday, April the 9th, Easter Sunday, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. Well, why would you do a podcast on Easter Sunday, Strong? I mean, you normally do it on Saturday, sometimes Friday night, sometimes the middle of the week if you're on the road, sometimes, but almost never on a Sunday, and never on a holiday like Easter. Well, there's a reason for it. Actually, this is not a Easter Sunday podcast. That's not the theme of today's podcast. But Friday afternoon and all day Saturday were big, exciting days and things that just filled my day so full that, sorry, dear listeners, but I did not have time to do a podcast. So I figured I'd do it on Sunday morning, even though it's Easter, and let you know what's going on and why the podcast didn't happen on Friday night or Saturday morning. About a week and a half ago, you may have seen the pictures posted on my Facebook page with the 1951 Jaguar Mark 7 that my father gave to me, and I'm in the process of rehabbing with help from others. About a week and a half ago, I got the notice that it was finished, and so we got some dates set up. We got arrangements for a tow truck to pick it up and take it to my shop. We got the invoicing all straightened out. So Friday afternoon, I went over to the guy who did the painting and the engine work and paid him and had the tow truck take it over to my shop. My two boys and actually two guys from one of the adjacent shops that were around, they helped us push the car into the slip, and it's there. So after a long Friday, I looked about and I had parts everywhere because many of these parts that the shop painted for me, they didn't reinstall on the car for a variety of reasons. They could have probably if I would have asked them, but everything they do is so much per hour. So there's a lot of this work I'm doing for myself. And as I mentioned before with this car, I'm having a lot of the work done. But the only thing I'm having done is the stuff that I can't do myself. I don't know how to do body work. I don't know how to. I don't have I don't have a sandblaster big enough to sandblast a car. I don't have painting equipment. I don't know how to do body work correctly. Could I learn it? Sure. But I'd like to get this thing at least partially finished so I can drive it sometime before I die. Okay. So, and the engine work as well. I know a bit about cars and how they work. Do I want to take apart, an engine that's 72 years old and redo it? No. In fact, I mentioned before, there's only one guy in the St. Louis area that really knows Jaguars. He's over in Illinois. He did the engine rebuild. As far as the transmission rebuild, there's nobody. And there's a guy in Connecticut who does this stuff. So we had to ship the transmission to the guy in Connecticut so he could rebuild it correctly. The shop that I commissioned to do this work, put it back together, ran it on the dyno, or on the engine stand, I should say, put it back in the car. We're ready, and we took it over to the shop. And again, when I left the shop after putting it in, there were parts everywhere. So Saturday morning, I spent basically staging all these parts and rearranging the whole shop so that I could actually have room to work. And there's a method to this madness. You do some things before others. The inkling is quick, put on the chrome to make it look good. Okay, you can do that, but there's no wiring in the car. Okay, there's nothing hooked up into the car except for the engine and transmission. So the next thing that has to be done is there's always little things that have to be done. Parts on the car that I thought were assembled were not assembled, which is fine. So I'm having to clean those up and put those back on. Sometimes bolts exist, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the bolts that are in there are, well, they're 72-year-old bolts that may or may not work right anymore. They may have been stripped. They may have been rusted. And if you just spent all that time, effort, and money on a car to make it look primo, you don't want to put an old rusty bolt back in and make it look bad. So the next thing I'm going to do with this thing is put all the electrical parts back onto the car. Put all the other parts back onto the car. The regulator, the voltage meters, the fuse boxes, the everything has to do with electrics, okay? Or the fuel pump has to go on. I have to run fuel lines I have to put the gas tank in, run the fuel lines from the gas tank to the carburetor. I have to buy a fuel pump. I have to buy fuel lines. The brakes have to be finished up and put back on. I need sumps or reservoirs for the brake fluid and the hydraulic fluid for the clutch. I mean, there's a ton of work that has to be done. But a lot of times the bolt-on stuff for this, I need fasteners. Well, how do you get fasteners? Well, if you're a shop, you have free stock. I don't have free stock. So these things all need to be measured up, and I need so many 1/4 by 1/4 inch car bolts and nuts and washers. So many 5/16, 18, so many 1/4 20s, so many 1032s, etc., etc., etc. So the next stop is, or the next thing I have to do with this car is actually decide what fasteners I need for the car. And you think to yourself, well, how hard could that be? Friends, that's probably going to take a whole day, and you need somebody to help you with it for two reasons. First of all, many of these things bolt through the firewall. Those that don't bolt through the firewall bolt through the wheel wells, okay? And most of them they're just holes, and they're held on with a bolt that goes through the engine compartment, comes out the firewall or the wheel well, and then you attach it with a nut and or a washer. How long does it need to be? Well, you don't want it too long because it could stick out and interfere with something else. You don't want it too short because you want to make sure the washer and the bolt hold properly. So, and the other thing about this car that's different, those of you that have seen pictures of it, and I've got all kinds of pictures on my Facebook page, this is a big car. And it's not only a big car, it's a tall car. And you think to yourself, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, walk up to the car that you have right now, okay? The hood probably hits you mid-belly, okay? That's just how tall cars are. The fender or the hood on this car hits you about mid-chest, okay? In other words, to bend over that to get into the engine compartment is difficult. The way I did it to disassemble is I physically climbed into the engine compartment, stood on the engine, and took all that stuff apart. Well, that engine's been rebuilt. That's not going to happen anymore, okay? So I've got to figure a way to do that. It's basically a two-man job. You bend over, you put stuff in, you do some measurements, get somebody to look on the other side. Okay, this bolt needs to stick out another half inch sticking out plus a half inch here. The bolt needs to be an inch long, okay? And to answer your question, no, we're not going with British Whitworth bolts. We're going with standard Imperial bolts, 1/4 20, 1/4 28, 5/16, 18, 1032, etc. I've already got one bolt that's odd. It's a 1232, which are just oddball bolts, and it's the nuts actually, because the bolt is part of the assembly that holds on the caps for the gas tank. They're part of the engine, so I have to source 1232 nuts, which is going to be difficult, but that's okay. So measuring up, sourcing the bolts, nuts, washers, buying them, bringing them back, and then again, with help, putting all that stuff back onto the car. And you think, well, why do you need help putting that stuff back on a car? Again, if it bolts through the engine compartment and comes out through the firewall or comes out through the fender well, one person has to hold it, and a guy on the other side of the car where you cannot physically reach has to screw on the nut and the washers. So you need two people. It's not a hard job, not difficult. It's not time consuming. You don't have to be a rocket scientist, but unless you have 20-foot long arms, you can't do it. So that's the next step. I have had all kinds of people say, well, you need to do this next and you need to do that next. Like my father said, he noticed the shifter the shifter lever. Okay. It was chrome plated and the chrome is peeled off. He said, you know what? You need to get that thing stripped and chrome plated. And he's right. But that is so far down on the lists to make a perfectly functioning part look prettier. That's way down on the list. A lot of this stuff's going to happen, but it's going to happen later on. The seats, for instance, he said, well, maybe you need to buy some new seats. I said, no, I don't need to buy new seats. I need to get the ones I have fixed up, recovered. I said, but in the meantime, I can bolt the existing ones into the car, throw a slip cover over it, and still drive it. Remember, the ultimate goal is to get this thing on the road and drivable. Once that happens, then I can fix up the seats. I can put on the chrome. I can redo the shifter lever. All that stuff can be done. All that stuff can be done after the car starts to run. Because that's what's most important. Get it on the road. When you spend the money and time and effort and grief that I have with this car so far, to say, yeah, well, I'll get it running later. And it's not going to be running tomorrow. It's going to be quite some time before I get this thing running because I still have the day job. I still have my days are monopolized. Now it's springtime, so I got the yard to care for. The garden goes in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You don't want to neglect those other things that are important. You don't want to stay out so late working on a car that you don't get to take the wife out for dinner. You know what I'm talking about. The life cannot be about rehabbing a car. So you need to put your time in, but you need to make sure that you have everything done. Prioritize and make sure you don't put the cart before the horse. The car is not the number one thing in your life right now. The car is way down on the list, but just needs attention. How's that? Does that make sense? So, Saturday morning podcasts, I'm still going to try to keep them. I'm still going to try to get up early, do the podcast, then go work on the car. You may be seeing more Friday afternoon or Friday evening and Sunday morning podcasts just because Saturdays may be spent working on the car early to late. During the winter when working on the car, it was no big deal. I'm not going to go there till 10 o'clock anyway, mainly because when you wake up at 6, have a couple of cups of coffee, it's 7, and you look outside and it's 17 degrees, you think, maybe I'll wait till it gets to at least 25 before I work on this thing. Because the shop isn't heated. It is and it isn't. I've got a heater, a space heater, that actually takes some of the chill off of the shop after a while. The shop is kind of built into a hill, so it never gets super cold. Even in times when the temperature was down into the single digits overnight, I go into the shop that morning by the time I got up to the teens, and the water in the parts cleaner was not frozen. So even though it was 8 degrees outside overnight, it stayed warm enough in that shop to be something above 32 degrees. Now, that was probably 33 and a half or less, but it was something not below 32. So now that spring is here, the weather's warmer, I don't need the heater. I can start earlier, perhaps work later, get more done. I don't want to be working on Sundays either because, again, I don't want this thing to be... I want this... The rehabbing of this car is one of the many things in my... one more arrow in the quiver of things that I like to do. It's not going to be an obsession. I'm trying not to make it the number one thing that goes on, but it'll get done eventually. I'll continue to give updates. And again, if you're interested in seeing pictures, the latest Facebook post I put on, I actually took the pictures on Friday night and posted them on Saturday mornings. And it's a before and after. In fact, one of the before pictures has my father next to the car, and the before and after pictures are quite telling. And it's It's beautiful. We were able to source the original color. I went through the, let me read off the certificate. The Jaguar Heritage Trust. And it's like any other thing that the Brits do. It's an official document, official organization with seals of royalty stamped all over it. It's the official clearinghouse of the Queen or the King or whatever. But basically, any car made in England, any classic car like a Jaguar or a Bentley or Rolls, Aston Martin, et cetera, has a history to it. It's in the archives. So I accessed those archives at a price, and I found out the original color was a twilight blue. Now, the guy had painted it. I don't know what he was doing to it, the guy who had it before my father. And it was something between a pale beige and a baby poop brown. It was awful. Maybe this was a color. Maybe this was a primer. I don't know what he was doing to this thing. But the original color was twilight blue. And apparently, twilight blue was a very rare color used only by Jaguar, only for a little while. And, kudos to It's Alive Automotive, the folks who did the work for me. It took them a long time, but they finally sourced the color. And the odd thing is the guy who supplied them the color is a company called here in St. Louis called Crest. And Crest was owned by a gentleman named Rich Garlick. His sons own it now. Rich Garlick, growing up, was my father's best friend, was his best man in his wedding. And his company was the one that sourced the paint for that car that he bought some 55 years ago. So that is a bizarre story, and you can't make that stuff up. But it was a unique color. These guys did a good job painting it, and it looks beautiful. Now it's time to spend some time and effort and a little bit more money putting this thing together. My wife, half jokingly and half seriously, asked me, said, "Okay, are you done spending money on this car?" And I said, "No, we're not, but the bills now will be in the hundreds of dollars, not in the thousands of dollars. So the bills will be less frequent and a whole lot smaller." In fact, that's why I told my dad, when he said, "Let's get this this shifter handle stripped and chrome plated," I said, that's going to cost money, and I have bought all kinds of parts to put this thing back together. I mean, I've got glass seals, I've got wiring, I've got, you name it, I've got it. Okay. There's a lot of stuff I can do to this car without spending a nickel, because it's either here or it's on back order yet. Or it's parts that I've already rebuilt myself. So much of the money has been spent. Two more things on back order. I have some stainless steel brake lines that are being custom made in the UK. Those are still on back order, as is the exhaust system, which is, again, stainless steel, custom made in the UK. That stuff takes time. And I had no idea how much time this took. I have no idea when I'll get those two parts. I had again, custom made in the UK, brake cable. And this is for the emergency brake. You pull the emergency brake, and it's the mechanical brake that you use for parking or for emergencies if the hydraulics go out, okay? And it was a cable with custom fittings, custom length, etc. I ordered that in December of 2021. It came last Friday. So that thing was on back order for what, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 months on back order. But it came eventually. So there you go. You again, you've got to have patience with this stuff. You can't get impatient with it. So anyway, that's what was going on Friday night and Saturday, which is why I did not do the podcast. Lots more. There's lots more things that I can do in this car. So I will go ahead and post the pictures. I'll post the improvements, the progress I'm making now, because it's done in my shop by me, not in another shop by somebody else. So I'm kind of If it doesn't get done, I have nobody to blame but myself. If progress is slow, I can look in the mirror and yell at that guy. Okay, so there you go. And again, go to the James Strong Facebook page if you want to see pictures of the car before and after. However, I will not be working on the car next Saturday because next Tuesday I have the second or third adventure of the year. And this is my annual desert trip to Death Valley. Leave on Tuesday, come back on Saturday. I'll get in Saturday early afternoon. But Tuesday morning, I do this most every year. I did not do it last year. I think one year during COVID, I didn't do it because the place I like to stay around, everything. In fact, I think Death Valley National Park was closed, which I found that bizarre. Okay, COVID. Because of COVID-19, we're closing probably the most densely populated part of the country that exists. Okay, so let's close it, which made no sense, but that's what they did. But I'll be back this year. Tuesday morning, I get up at dark 30. I think my flight is like at 5:50 in the morning or something like that. Direct flight to Las Vegas. What I do is I pack all my stuff in 2 bags, one big duffel bag on wheels, and the other in a Pelican cooler. A Pelican cooler is like a Yeti cooler, except for it has wheels on it. And I pack my clothes in the Pelican cooler, my camping supplies in the duffel. Then when I get to Las Vegas Airport, I take the clothes out, throw them in the back seat, fill the Pelican with ice and supplies, and that's what I eat out of for a better part of a week in camping in Death Valley, actually in the Panamint Valley, which is adjacent to Death Valley, about 10 degrees cooler. Highs are going to be in the mid to upper 80s, lows in the mid 60s. You go down into Death Valley, and it would be high in the low to mid 90s, but most important, night would be in the 70s. The Panamint Valley is a whole lot better to sleep in because it gets cooler at night. So it goes down into the 60s at nighttime. But when that sun sets in the desert, this time of year, it gets cool. I mean, not cold, but it gets cool. It really cools down pretty quickly. July and August, not so much. I mean, it'll be 114 during the day, and it'll cool down to a nice, crisp, refreshing 101 at night. And that's not an exaggeration. One time, the time that me and a group climbed Mount Whitney, and we spent the night after Mount Whitney in Panamint Springs, and it never got under 100 degrees. And when I woke up the next morning, I saw that many in the group had never gone to bed. They just laid on the picnic benches, giving me the stink eye, saying, "Why did you bring us to this godforsaken place? We couldn't sleep. It was too hot." But I love it. I love the desert. It's where I like to go to think. It's where I go to reflect. It's where I go to relax. Because there is no cell phone service. There is no internet. There is no email. There's no texting. There's no Facebook. There's no Twitter. There's no instant messenger. There's none of that. I use my phone for 3 things: to check the time, to use a timer, because I do need a timer for my coffee, because my coffee, once it starts to boil, I have an old percolator I cook on my propane stove. The percolator perks coffee for 4 minutes, so I use it for my timer. And also I use it to take pictures. So that's all I use a camera for. I don't talk on a phone. I don't text. I don't email because there's no service. And I love it because you're truly off the grid. You can truly take a breath. There's no sense in looking at your phone because there's nothing there to look at. There's no service. None. In fact, I just turned that stuff off because if you don't turn it off, the phone constantly pings and looks for a tower and it wears out your battery in no time. So you just turn it off. You turn the reception part of the phone off. You can still take pictures, still look at the time. You can still use some of the features like the timer. And the timer is important because camping, one of the highlights of camping for me is coffee in the morning. I tried to buy a percolator and I couldn't find one. I found a couple of them, but they weren't very sturdy. They didn't look good. They were made in China. I'm thinking, I don't want this piece of garbage. And then I'm discussing this to a buddy of mine who's also a camper. He said, because he has a mobile home he uses. He says, we bought this percolator, but we've got electricity in the camper, and we just use a regular coffee pot. I don't want this stupid percolator. So he sold it to me for what he bought it for. So for just a little bit of money, I now have a percolator. It's a, I can't think of the name, maybe a Wherever or a Proctor Silex, one of the old legacy brands. It's with the bake-like top and the stainless steel, sturdy stainless steel insides and outside. And it's a good old school percolator. It will never go bad. It's like the cowboys had, okay? And it makes absolutely the best coffee if it's done right. The trick with coffee, those of you who are coffee fans, the trick with coffee is you need to get the water hot, but you don't want boiling water to go over the grounds, because then that's how you get your bitter taste to it. So the way a percolator works, you've got your basket of coffee grounds. Okay, picture this for those of you who don't know what a coffee percolator is. But you've got a tube that goes up from the bottom. On the bottom of that tube is a dish. The water's heated from the bottom. So as the water boils, it comes up that tube. Now, if it were to come up that tube and just immediately go on to the coffee grounds, it would burn. The water would be too hot, and it would burn the bean. It would burn the coffee, and it'd have a real bitter taste to it. But with a percolator, it comes up that tube, it shoots up through the top of the coffee pot, hits like a globe, a glass globe that's in there, hits that glass globe. The glass globe is cooler because it sits up at the top. When it hits that glass globe, that water cools from something like 212 degrees, that's boiling. But by the time it comes up through the tube, hits the glass globe, then comes down over the coffee beans, that temperature has dropped. Not by much, maybe just from 212 to, 208, let's say. But it's enough because the water's no longer boiling temperature. And it just makes for amazing coffee. One of the highlights of my trip when I'm at the campground is I like to, and there's other people there sometimes, usually not a lot, but usually some, quite often Europeans. And I'll make coffee in the morning and just grab a cup, and you go over to somebody else's campsite and you start talking, or they come over to your campsite and you start talking. If you run out of coffee, they usually offer you a cup from their camp, or if they're at my camp, I'll offer them a cup from my camp and just make more. I mean, it's social hour, and quite often social hour in the morning turns into social hours, plural. I've gone from 6 to 10 in the morning, sometimes 4 hours just talking to people. Okay, what are you going to do today? And sometimes you're going to do something similar, and you do something together that day. It just depends on the situation. Oftentimes you share stories and your experiences from the day with those same people, but perhaps over a beer instead of a cup of coffee. So just camaraderie at the campgrounds. Like I said, dark 30, I get up, fly to Las Vegas with my stuff. First thing I do after I land in Las Vegas, I pick up my rental car and I have breakfast. And I like to go to the Pepper Mill. The Pepper Mill is on the old strip up near where the Riviera used to be. If you know where the Riviera used to be on the strip, okay, up. I can't even think of what's there now. I know what used to be there. It's funny with Las Vegas. I picture the Las Vegas Strip as I remember it, not how it is. If you ask me what's at the corner of Las Vegas Boulevard and such, I'll say, well, that's the Riviera. No, they tore that down. What's the Sands? No, they tore that down. The new Sands is someplace else. It's hard for me to tell you what's there now, but I can tell you what used to be there. So anyway, the Pepper Mill is near. It's like what would I call this place? Maybe like a Denny's on steroids. Okay, except for it's privately owned, very iconic. They filmed the movie Goodfellas there. The casino scenes were all filmed in Pepper Mill because it's actually a breakfast spot on one side and the other side is a cocktail lounge and casino. So the movie Casino was filmed there. not Goodfellas. I think I said Goodfellas, didn't I? No, it wasn't Goodfellas. It was the movie Casino, the other movie with Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci. The film The Cotton Club was also filmed in the Peppermill restaurant and casino. So you can always get a nice breakfast there. Their coffee's good. You know, bacon, eggs, pancakes, big monster breakfast. Eat that, get your belly full. Then I go to Walmart and buy my supplies for the week and my ice, and then I head out to the desert. Highway 98 most of the way through Las Vegas, through Indian Wells, which is where the drone headquarters for the U.S. is. The big Air Force base at Indian Wells. You see the drones taking off all the time. And quite often, when you hear of drone activity and a U.S. drone bombed a Syrian post or whatever, quite often the guy who drove that drone was right there in Indian Wells, Nevada. So it's a big deal, and that's where the drone fleet is. That's like the what I want to say, the think tank is of all the drones in the country is in Indian Wells. So you go past that into the town of Beatty, then you turn off onto, is it 120, I think? Take that all the way in through Death Valley and into Panamint Springs. I set up camp, relax, take it easy, cook dinner, go to bed. Second day, usually I take a hiking trip up to Wild Rose Peak. It's a nice hike. It's like 12 miles there and back. I don't think I'm going to do that this time because the last time I looked at the reviews for Wild Rose Peak, there was still snow up to your thighs to get to the peak. And while it's certainly doable, wading through snow up to my thighs for 12 miles is not my idea of fun. So not sure what I'm going to do that day. Maybe I'll just hang around and take a hike until the snow gets bad and then comes back. Don't know yet. Day two, last two times I went, I mentioned this before, there's a set of sand dunes in the distance I can see from my camp. And they're about 8.5 miles away. So that's about a 17-mile round trip. It's a lot to walk in a day, but you can do it. But I've never done it because I can't carry enough water. Because something you've got to remember in the desert is water is so important. It's so crucial. And when I'm halfway done with my water, I turn around and come back. You don't say, well, let's just go a little further. No, when you're halfway done with water, you turn around and come back. Because what you don't want to do is get too thirsty out there. Now, if you were to drink all your water and then turn around and come back, you weren't going to die. But here's what can happen. You can get lightheaded and you stop thinking straight. And what you got to remember when you're hiking through the desert, even though you can see those sand dunes from California State Highway 190, okay? You can see the sand dunes. So you're in the middle of nowhere, but there's a highway not far off. But there's no cell phone service, and you can't hear a scream. And if you're not paying attention and you step into a rattlesnake hole and get bit by a rattlesnake, and you're 4 miles from camp, friend, you're just going to die. It's as simple as that. So you need to keep a clear head about you. That's why when I'm halfway out of water, I turn around. Now, I saw from a camping site called All Trails, there's a back way into this. And actually, you can drive partway into the back way. It's like a 3.5 mile hike into it. So in other words, instead of 8.5 miles one way, it's 3.5 miles one way. So what is that? That's less than half. So I think I'm going to try it that way. I think I can carry enough water to hike 7 miles there and back. So finally, on the third attempt, I think I'm going to get to those sand dunes. I also like to, on the third day, to take a trip into the town of Lone Pine, go up through the Alabama hills where a lot of old films were filmed. I like to get maybe a meal at a restaurant, a sit down in the air conditioning and take a break, take a load off my feet and have a nice chicken salad and Coke. Then come on back, go to bed, wake up the next morning and have breakfast, break camp, go to Las Vegas. And Friday night, I plan on spending in Las Vegas. Get up at dark 30, catch a direct flight home from Las Vegas to St. Louis. And then I'll be home about mid-afternoon. You think to yourself, well, why would you leave so early? Why would you just leave later? Because that's kind of your MO, Strong. You like to come early, which is what I'm going to do, and you like to leave late. Well, here's why I like to leave early when I'm leaving Las Vegas. There's two reasons. First of all, if you fly on a Saturday morning and you leave at 6 a.m., the airfare is X. The only other direct flight, I think, it's at 7:30 at night, okay? And the airfare is X squared because everybody wants to stick around a little longer. Because when one goes to Las Vegas, what most people do is like to drink and they like to party and they like to gamble. I don't drink much. My partying is hiking in the desert and I don't gamble. So that's not my thing. Plus the airfare is X squared. It costs a bunch more. Plus by the time I'm done with the desert, you're by yourself. I don't want to spend a whole day in Las Vegas. I got to check out of the hotel by 1. What do I do in the meantime? Walk around, get sweaty, then I stink on the plane on the way home? No, thanks. I'll just come home and be home. So that's my plan. That was my plan from Friday through next Saturday. Okay. And Monday I'll be working at the day job. So I am going to go to work on Monday. And then the rest of it is fun and games. So the next podcast is going to be, you guessed it, I'll be talking about my adventure in Death Valley. It'll be adventure number 2. And what does a strong man always say? That you should take heed to, and you should listen to, and you should do. Have the adventure of a lifetime 3 times a year. And this is adventure number 2. Number 1 was Puerto Rico earlier this year. When you folks were freezing your tails off, the trophy wife and I were in Puerto Rico. Number 2 is going to be the Death Valley adventure. Number 3 is going to be the trophy wife and I are celebrating our 40th anniversary. And in late July, we're going to take a river cruise up the Danube from Budapest to, I forget the name of the little German town, kind of close to Munich. So that's in late July, early August. Again, she stuck around with me for 40 years. So it's the least I could do. So that's it. We're done. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. James Strong Show at hotmail.com. That's the email address. If you send me a link or if you send me your email address, I will send you a link to the podcast. So you can go ahead and just check your email, download the podcast, and listen to it at your leisure. You can also hear me on iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Spotify. Not Spotify. Yeah, you can hear me on Spotify. Yeah, basically, Apple, iTunes. I'm every place. Podcaster Brad Hildebrand's website and station, or at Spreaker.com. That's the host of the James Strong Show podcast. Well, that's it. I'm done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.